head up to learn about this from all of you. But what we do, our key job, is still to keep our head down, to fix things on the ground. So I think there's so much we can fix. Going back to the question Zainab asked earlier, where does the money coming from? So we took the revenue from bauxite to build Simandou. And now we took revenue to build our first processing refinery of alumina. So I think it's not just looking for outside source of capital. I think Africans, as well as all of us who invest and build in Africa, we have to look into the mirror and ask what we can do in this time of volatility, in this time maybe our ships have to stop, what we can do back at home to build, to strengthen our own capacity.
I think you've all made the case for, mega projects which work in various sectors. We know we have these 54 economies, quite fragmented, and you need some integration, regional integration within Africa and so on. But in terms of scale or fail, you mustn't also forget those SMEs who make up the bulk of the private sector. So do you think that one is able to do both, to keep both in your sights, the big mega projects, make sure they don't end up becoming white elephants, which we've seen in the past plenty of times, and the stranded assets, and you keep sight of those SMEs, particularly in sectors like agriculture? Are you concerned that perhaps there may be a little bit of oversight on the SMEs?
Oh, yes, indeed. The role of SMEs is important. I mean, let me go back to Lobito Corridor. It's a PPP, it's a government PPP initiative. What the fund is doing today, the 1 billion impact platform, it's feeding SMEs. It's looking to the the pool of micro players in different sectors that can benefit for that big infrastructure. Most of these mega projects, they expect to drive value chains. That is where the SMEs will.
Hello and welcome back to the Africa CEO Forum TV. I'm your host, Terry Anshabed. Now, my next conversation is focused on making the road networks fit for intra-Africa trade. Now, Africa moves about 80% of its freight by road, and data shows that it's cheaper to ship a container from Shanghai to Africa than to transport goods overland across the African continent. Now, a potential $275 billion US dollars boost to intra-Africa trade by the year 2045 through the AFCFTA hinges on rebuilding 60,000 kilometers of corridors at roughly $400,000 per kilometer, as well as overcoming low road density, congestion, and of course the high freight costs. For construction leaders pioneering this mega project and mega corridors across the continent, are the returns strong enough to justify a continent-scale road transformation? Joining me now to get a deep dive into this conversation is Papa Amadou Sarr, the Managing Director of Poteo Group. Papa, thank you so much for joining us on the Africa CEO Forum TV.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. So just tell us, first of all, before we get into the crux of the conversation, what do you see as the current state of the road network across the African continent?
It's getting better, but obviously the African roads networks could be described as one of the poorest on the planet. Unfortunately, it has lacked massive investment over the last decades. It is estimated by the World Bank and the African Development Bank that it needs around $180 billion a year to reduce that gap. Yet the financing that is available for investing in infrastructure is approximately around 60 to 70 billion dollars a year, which means that we still have some poor infrastructure which is lacking maintenance, not only about the roads but also, to facilitate trades, the logistics. You have to have connectivity between roads and rail, especially to reach landlocked countries like Rwanda. So this is not really happening on the continent right now, and it is increasing the cost of shipping and logistics to Africa by 40% more expensive than the rest of the world, like in Asia. It is cheaper, for instance, to ship goods from China to Africa than from one African country to another, which is a pity, and we have to work on that.
Well, a bleak picture there, but as you started us off, you said, it is getting better.
Yeah.
So just tell us, what specific corridor projects do you see on the continent have succeeded in boosting trade volumes, and where do you see, Africa leaving the billions on the table by not scaling upgrades continent-wide?
The Lobito corridor is something that is, getting massive attraction at the time being. I heard the World Bank is working on a $20 billion investment in that region, and all the countries that this corridor is passing through are putting together the efforts with billions of dollars of investment to be able to attract more goods and services. The East Africa corridor as well, from Nairobi to Ethiopia, is also one of the most promising ones, and with investments coming from China and other Asian countries. I come from the West Africa region. I'm from Senegal, and one of the most compelling one to me is the Dakar, Lagos through Abidjan, which is something that is in the work. Countries are working, in their own countries in order to come to the borders so that these connection happen. There is a long corridor from Abidjan to Lagos of 1,028 kilometers, passing through 5 to 6 different countries. And this is one of the key, I would say, connection for regional integration within ECOWAS, which I believe governments and countries like ours have to do our best work to do it. And last but not least, there is a corridor from Dakar to Algiers, passing through Mauritania, where there's a bridge that has been built between Mauritania and Senegal, the Rosso Bridge, which has reduced the transit of goods and people from 5 hours a day to less than 1 hour, which shows how important it is to invest and fund those corridors.
And of course, those corridors, should make it easier for businesses, both large and small, to be able to, to trade across borders. Yeah. You earlier mentioned a figure that I think is quite staggering. Increasing the 40% higher on, for transportation within Africa compared to, what the global world is. I'm just curious to find out, what is causing that high cost, and what can be done to reduce it?
Exactly. There are main factors, but the four main ones are, we can mention the domestic checkpoints between countries at the borders. We can also mention administrative burdens from country to country. We can mention customs tariffs, and especially when you don't have regional integration schemes between countries. So from a country to another, you have to stop at the border, you have to pay taxes, you have to queue for, sometimes you pay for fines, sometimes you have cars and trucks and people that spend the night at the border because the border is closed at 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. And you have some abuse of people, especially women that are doing the trans-border commerce trade between countries. And last but not least, you have some countries that do not recognize all the procedures you've done to the preceding countries, so that it makes it more complicated to move things, goods, people, and obviously a lack of coordination between the countries. So to me, there is no other solution than what has been done in the United States, in Europe, putting a framework of regional integration, having the same currency, the same tariffs, the same passport for people in the region, I would say, on the continent. The ZLECAf is one of the main arguments that the AU has put together for the AU Vision 2063, which for me, for our generation, is far, that they have to reduce and make sure that over the next 5-10 years, we see that happening. A common African passport, a common African trade agreement, a common regional integration, and a common African currency. President Tinubu of Nigeria mentioned it yesterday in the panel, and the journalists pointed out rightly the question of when the Afro, the currency for Africans, like the euro for Europe.
Wow, okay. Of course, that is the dream for, the AFCFTA and Agenda 63 by the AU as well. And, it's good to see that some of these things that need to be done are beginning to get visible across the continent. So hopefully that, that number of 40% higher will be brought down. Tell us, in terms of incentives for construction companies to build or rehabilitate intra-African road networks, is there a good return on investment?
It depends. It depends on the roads. It depends on the segments, be it if it's a concession, if it is a PPP, or if it is a government-funded project. To be more elaborate on that, if you have a bidding process that is fair, you earn it, you get paid for what you do, the roads you build and the maintenance that happen, you can get good value of it. But, it is a one-shot project. The opportunities the companies that are building the infrastructure road, which for us can be more interesting if we have all the incentives, such as guarantees from governments, such as traffic, services, and people that move back and forth. We prefer to have concessions where you fund your projects in a BOT, build, operate, and transfer mechanism, and you run that infrastructure, be it a highway, be it an expressway within the city, and people pay the use on a daily basis, and these will get the company the resources that it has invested. Now, it will allow it to pay some taxes to government and also maintain the infrastructure so it lasts for longer. So for us, in a nutshell, the most favorable part, if the conditions are there, the right financing, the guarantees from government, which are financial, but also the guarantees for traffic, for movement of people and goods, that would be, one of the best options to invest in those infrastructures.
All right. Speaking of finance, of course, one of the biggest challenges facing the African continent in terms of, financing some of these mega projects is finance. And where do what are some of the places, you see this financing coming from? You've talked about BOTs, where, we're increasingly beginning to see that across the African continent. But, given that foreign investment has become quite selective, with what's happening globally, the Middle East crisis, policies as well from across the world that has just, reduced the amount of funding that is channeled to our side of the world. Where do you see, or, what are some of the financing options that Africa has?
Africa is the last frontier of investment. Of course, there are some shortages of financing, or the rates can be higher, but for inter-regional trade, for getting natural resources extracted from the continent, it is in the interest of the investing international investors, such as the multilateral development banks, the bilateral development banks, and also the pension funds and the funds such as BlackRock and the others that are specialized in infrastructure, to be able to continue to invest in Africa, to go and get the needs in terms of natural resources and other material they need for their own economic development. And one of the key partners that are today taking advantage of all this situation is Asian countries like China. You will see Chinese companies backed by Chinese government investing billions of dollars in roads, ports, to be able to connect African countries, but also to extract the resources from the continent for their own economic demand. So for me, the multilateral banks such as the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the IFC and all those financial institutions that have understood that there is a strong need to coordinate the instruments, resources, because the problem also is a disparity or an alignment or non-coordination between donors and investors across the continent. And increasingly, the private sector itself is bringing with its own financial resources to be able to invest on infrastructure in Africa. For me, I'm not worried at all about getting financial instruments to fund infrastructure in Africa. They might be, how can I say, more expensive and difficult to get, but at the end of the day, it will be there.
Papa, as we wrap up, when we meet again here at the Africa CEO Forum 10 years from today, how do you see, how far intra-regional road networks will have transformed, and how do you see that then, how will it have impacted businesses across the continent?
Well, in 10 years from now, as a infrastructure company and former official government of my country, Senegal, what I would love to see in the last 10 years is Africa that is more connected between Africans, producing our goods, exploiting our raw materials, transforming it locally, creating value, creating growth, creating jobs for Africa's youth and Africa's population. And for this to happen, as I said earlier on, there is a big shift from governments and policy to put together their forces and into more focused and ambitious and real, not only hypothetical, regional integration, putting together and forgetting about the borders and nationalities and passports of different countries and currencies, putting together the same corridors, same passport, same currency, to be able to tackle and challenge the development challenges the African continent and youth are facing. I hope that will happen in the next 10 years.
Absolutely, and I hope so as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for making time to speak with us this morning. I have been in conversation with Papa Amadou Sarr, Managing Director of Poteau Group, of course, looking at the conversation around intra-Africa corridors and what that could look like and what it will look like 10 years from today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This morning.
Thank you.
So we will be now transforming, getting into our next conversation, which will be a focus on the Africa Financial Summit 2026. Of course, a new chapter for Africa's financial agenda, and moderating that